Hello, everyone. Hi, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, whatever time zone you're joining us. Sincere apologies, we are like 9 minutes late today. This is the first, and we do hope you can forgive us for starting a bit late. We're super excited to have you all today on pretty much the first MLH info session we are having at Open Source Community Africa. And today we hope to talk more about the MLH Fellowship and pretty much run through the process, how it works, and also, introduce you to our special, very special guest today and, answer some of the questions you perhaps would have. So I'll just run you through the agenda. Feel free to let us know where you're joining in from in the chat section. I can see Rose. Hi, Rose. Nice to have you with us today. Okay. So we'll have the welcome session for 5 minutes, which we're kind of short on this time already. And then we'll have the general Q&A session, which would pretty much be me asking some questions to our guest. And then we have a quick overview of the MLH Fellowship itself, and then a couple of you already asked a lot of questions, and then we'll try to run through those also. Yes, so we have a very special guest with us today, and hi Rose. Okay, Rose is joining us from Kenya. Prosper apparently also has been part of our community for quite a very long time. One of our earliest chapter lead in Imo State, if I'm very correct. Prosper is an experienced full stack engineer with over 3 years of experience cutting across open source contributions, technical writing, and cloud native application development. Prosper has more experience working with JavaScript, Ruby, PHP, and is always learning and has keen interest in software architecture systems, design, web security, and cloud computing. And Prosper loves being called Code Cage, which I guess he would tell us more about that later, which pretty much is the word he coined to mean I'm responsible for my code. It's readability, maintainability, and cleanliness. I'm guessing that's some anime stuff there, which I have no idea how those work. In one of our earliest we had Shegun two webinars ago, and he's also a very keen anime fan. Without further ado, please welcome Prosper. Hey man.
Hello Bolaji. Yeah, thanks
How's
for
it
that
going?
wonderful introduction. Yeah, everything is going fine. I mean, thank God for everything.
Nice to have you with us today.
Yeah, feels great to be here also.
All right. So I would start with probably asking you a couple of questions, then introduce the MLH Fellowship itself for those who probably don't know much about it. Then we get to the questions the community already have for you. And of course, if you do have more insights you want to share, we look forward to that. So do you mind just giving us a background on your experience? How did you there's two parts to the question. There's how you built up a career to becoming a full stack engineer, and also how you found yourself in the open source ecosystem.
All right. Yeah, so I think my path to software engineering as a career started when I was in school. Right, I think it started from my year two. So I had this idea. I think it was a mix of different things, but it started from me having an idea. Right. Well, I mean, as students, as a student in school, then I think at some point, right, there's always that point where you have a lot, and there's that point where you have very little, right? So I was at that point where I had very little. So ideas started flowing. I was like, okay, what if I built a bank for students so that they can save for rainy days, and then I called it Study Bank, very similar to what Piggyverse. I think when Piggyverse started out, I've forgotten the name they had then. I think I've forgotten, but yeah, very similar to what Piggyverse does. But there was a problem. I couldn't build it out myself. I couldn't build the software myself. So one of those days while reading in the library, I met someone doing some writing PHP now. I know it's PHP now, but I just knew this guys. I've seen this in the movie before. So I was like, guy, I have this idea. Can you write code for me? Guys, I should pay 15K. I mean, someone that is broke, you're telling me to pay 15K. So I was like, okay, what if I learn how to code myself? Right, and that was where this. Well, I feel like the idea sparked the thoughts to go learn how to code. Then fast forward, I met a senior in my department, Franklin AG. He was the one that kickstarted, or he started off the direction and mentorship, like mentored me, and I began my journey to learn how to code. Yeah, so my journey started much as an idea in school, and found someone that could mentor, tutor me, and I started learning. And I think I've learned from that time to this point, and I think it's everything has summed up to bring me to this point in my life, right, and in my career as a software engineer working at Demos full time. Yeah, my part towards open source contribution, right? I think it actually started way before I even joined my current company, Demos, right? I think when I was also in school, I was involved with community development, right? Like Bolaji rightly mentioned, I think I and some of my friends, we started the first open source community Africa in Imo State, where I was schooling at the time, right? So prior to that, I was involved with community development a lot, right? I was involved with Facebook developer circles in Owerri with my very good friend Ndubisi, right? I was also involved with the Google developer community in the first GDG. I think the first GDG in Owerri, Imo State, right? It was in photo. We used to call it GDG photo at the time, right? So I was involved with that, and that was where I really learned what open source was. And I think coupled with the fact that at the time, this the time frame was, I think it was towards 2019, 2018, 2020, no, 2019, 2018. So there was a huge open source evangelism in Africa, right? Especially with the likes of Prosper Opara, and I think then GDG, the whole GDG communities, any GDG events you attend, they would always talk about open source, right? So that was my first real exposure to what open source was. And yeah, I picked up interest and started looking for how can I get myself involved with open source, right? Yeah. So I think that sort of answers the questions. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you very much for sharing that, Prosper. That's a lot already. And I will ask one more question at the end. So everyone try and remember what Prosper said now, how he got in, and then we'll pretty much figure out how that's been going on for him now and what his experience has been and if he has any regrets later on. But yeah, let's delve a bit into what we have today. We'll talk more about the MLH Fellowship. So please, if you do have any extra questions, feel free to ask in the chat. We do already have like a lot of questions that we would ask. So we'll prioritize that and then we'll take further questions. It could be related to MLH, it could be related to Prosper's career or anything random. So if you're new and you probably don't know what the MLH Fellowship is, it's a 12-week internship alternative where participants earn a stipend and learn to collaborate on real open source projects with peers and engineers from top companies. So the MLH Fellowship, that's a major league hacking, partners with engineers from companies like GitHub, Solana, Meta, AWS, Google, and a bunch of others. And basically how it works is that, they bring people, it's pretty much an internship. So it's only just kind of more different from a traditional internship because here you get to actually work on more stuff and you get like direct mentorship from these people. So they run like different batches in a year. So for 2024, for example, there's a summer B batch and then there's the fall batch. The fall batch is the one that anyone who's like listening to this webinar is applicable to apply for. Application is ongoing now. I think it closes in like maybe 2-3 weeks from now because it starts by September 16th, right? So basically how it works is Monday to Friday, 20 hours per week. And the program is eligible to those who are above the age of 18. You can commit to 20 hours per week. You can proficiently speak English and you're within some certain time zones because it's like an actual, in one sense, it's preparing you for an actual job because you get to like join stand-up meetings, you get to like collaborate with people and all that stuff. So it's also remote. And you need to have like some setup at least to like join calls and all that stuff. So this is how the process works generally, right? You submit your application, they ask you a couple of questions, quite a couple of them, about yourself, your experience, and why you want to be an MLH fellow, which we'll get to talk about that more when we get to learn more about Prosper's experience when he did apply amongst the first cohort in 2020, I believe. And after the application process, you get to be interviewed, you speak to one of their program coordinators, and then they finalize your enrollment. So, in one sense, like I mentioned, you get like a very structured educational curriculum. It's remote friendly. You also like get like a group of interns in one sense who are like you work together with them. There's like a pod of like 10 other fellows. You get technical mentorship. You get to work on real world projects. You get career training, and you also get a stipend. It's a very small stipend, at least to cover all the cost of learning and internet and all that stuff. So for a regular internet MLH fellowship, you have this kind of like a draft schedule where you like, you start your daily stand up by 10 a.m. You do like peer programming sessions. You join a couple of like speaker sessions with some of their guests. And then it's like a lunch break. It's like an actual job in one sense, which is really good because this prepares you for the actual real world in that sense, which could be a bit more beneficial than other traditional internships in that sense. You also get to like work through their practical curriculum session. They have like a learning management system where you can assess your courses and all that stuff. You then also get to contribute to projects, and you also get people review your code. Yes, so in one sense, that's pretty much what the MLH fellowship looks like, generally speaking. If you want to, of course, you can already begin to like look out for some more information on my tickets fellowship.mlh.io. The link to apply is also on this page. So we have like tons of questions from people already, but before we get into them, I think I'll just start with generally allowing Prosper to like share his experience. Like, how did you find the MLH fellowship itself? What was the process like? What prompted you to apply? How did you apply? And all that stuff. Whatever you can tell. I'm sure some questions already target different parts of that process, but if you just give us like a quick overview.
Yeah, so I think I would probably answer this question by stating that the best thing anyone starting out to code can do for him or herself is to join a community, because I think the first place I heard or learned about the MLH fellowship was in the GitHub student ambassador community. Yeah, because like I said, when I was in school, I was involved with community development. I was also a GitHub campus expert, so that was where I learned about MLH fellowship, because GitHub at the time was, I think, they were the first official sponsor of the MLH fellowship. So there was this push in the GitHub campus expert community for people to apply and try to get people in their community to also apply. So that was where I learned about the fellowship, right? So when I applied, probably I can save the application process because I'm very sure someone might have asked about that.
Yeah.
But it was very straightforward, right? And I would probably get to answer that later. But overall, my experience as a fellow, right? So I think I had it was funny thing is when I got into the MLH fellowship, I think I got into the MLH fellowship, if I'm not mistaken, January, February, March, April, May. I think I got in May, right? And I think 2 months after, that was when I got into Demos. Funny story, right? So MLH fellowship was like my first full-time introduction to like working, not just doing open source as a solo developer, but now doing open source with other developers. Like, so it gave me my first introduction to like, this is how like a software engineering team looks like. Like we were doing things like retrospective, right? At the end of every week, we had what we called the pod team leader, because then they grouped up into what we call pods, right? Every week, our pod team leader organizes a retrospective for us, like reflect, this is what did you do this week? Did you achieve the things you wanted to achieve? Did you have any blocker? Right? I think we used to call it the red green refactor retrospective, right? So that was like my first introduction to like, this is how a software engineering team should work, right? Also, when we were added to that community, we were not just added as newbies. Like there was a lot of seasoned open source contributors there. We had the contributor for Homebrew. We had Facebook developers on that group. I remember I saw the Jest, the anyone here that uses Jest for testing, like the developers, people that actively maintain and use Jest, they were in that community answering questions, right? So I got to really meet a lot of seasoned software engineers slash open source contributors. And personally for me, I worked on Oh My ZHS. It's like a plugin for people here that use Mac OS, right? And I think Linux, right? It's more like what OMA ZHS is more like a shell script plugin. It helps you beautify your ZHS shell, right? It helps you beautify it, right? So that was the project I contributed to during my open source fellowship, right? The experience was wonderful. Because then prior to joining MLH, I didn't know what OMA ZHS was. I was like, okay, what is a new project? Fantastic. And I did a lot of shell scripting because OMA ZHS is it works on the shell, right? So you have to do a lot of shell scripting, right? So when I was joining, I was thinking like, okay, so I think a lot of you might be like, I need to master a lot of languages to join the open source the fellowship, but I think that's not true, right? Because even when I was entering, the language I thought I would be assigned to was not even the language I got. The project I joined had nothing to do with JavaScript because that was what I was more proficient with at the time, right? So I was right. I had to learn shell scripting on the fly. And one thing, when looking back, one thing I really love about fellowship is that they are very, very patient with you, right? So it's almost like it's open source. You set There's a deadline for everything, but you work at your own pace, right? You work at your own pace. If you are blocked, you have your pod members to run to, and especially you have your pod team leader. I don't know if they've changed the name now, but we had a pod team leader that you could literally run to with any questions, right? So, and my pod leader was very, very helpful, especially towards asking questions. I mean, I was writing bash scripts for the first time in my life, right? So I ran to him a lot during the fellowship. Also, I can't have any experience. I can't talk about my experience without talking about the people I met, right? I met a diverse range of people there, right? I made a friend from Ghana. I can't sorry if you're Ghanaian, please forgive me. Boomyang. I think he's Boomyang. Yeah. I made a friend. He liked Ruby, right? So I also made some friends. Okay, one of my friends, so Raphael, we were in the same pod. He's a Nigerian. He also writes Ruby. We were in the same pod, right? So I met people, and I think I also had my own fair share of people like trying to look down on your work. There was this contribution I did, but that's by the way something that's happened a long time, and someone was like sort of doubting if I was one that actually did it, and I was like, okay, guys, see the committee here, right? So I had my own fair share of all of those stuff, right? So, but overall, I feel like MLH, like I said in the beginning when answering the question, MLH Fellowship was my first reintroduction to what a software engineering team should look like. And if you ask me, should I go back? Do I want to go through the experience again? 200% yes. If I can go back to do MLH Fellowship. And I mean, I was paid a stipend, right? And I mean, at the time, it was a lot. I think overall, I was paid 1,500. Okay, right? It was a lot. Yeah. So I really enjoyed and savored the entire experience.
Yeah, that's really amazing, Prosper. Thank you for sharing the experience. I could tell the excitement and the nostalgia while you were talking that you did indeed enjoy that experience. So let's delve into more of the questions. Feel free also, I think some people are already leaving some questions in the chat. Feel free to add more questions there. We will just go straight into the most of the questions. I forgot to mention during the earlier introduction. So this year, MLH Fellowship has 3 different tracks. So there's the software engineering track, which is for aspiring software engineers who want to like experience what it's like to collaborate on real world projects, kind of like what Prosper went through. And there's also a site reliability engineering track, which usually is called SRE. So if you want to learn the skills required to keep, systems running and at scale, that's a track for you. And they also have a Web3 engineering track, which is for hackers who want to dive deep into blockchain technology. So you can apply for either of these tracks, and all the information about many of those tracks will be found on the website. The link is on your screen right now. Prosper might not be able to answer so many questions on some of the other tracks that he has not been on. So feel free to like go to the site. There's also an FAQ session which answers the most of your questions. But feel free to keep more of your questions coming. So I think the first question we got was, is this opportunity for front-end developers, what skills I must have? I think I probably already answered half of it right now, but
Yeah.
you can take the last part.
Yeah. So I think in terms of what skill must you have, I'll be very honest with you. MLH Fellowship is not a fellowship that teaches you how to code. That's not the goal of MLH Fellowship. They aren't really sitting you down and telling you this is what a variable is, this is what an array is. No. To join the fellowship, you must have gotten to a certain level in your understanding of programming, right? Or yeah, at least to give you a concrete answer, you should have understood, or you should have a working knowledge of at least one programming language, right? To have a better opportunity, because during the interview, you'll be interviewed, you'll be asked to submit a project you've worked on previously, an open source project or any repository at all that's on GitHub, right? And your technical interview, you'll be asked questions from that repository, right? So you must have at least a working knowledge of one what's it called, one programming language, right? And you should have at least one project you've worked on, because that's what your interview will be based on. When I was applying, I was asked to submit the a GitHub link to any repository I've worked on the past. And yeah, I mean, I was working on projects at the time, so I shared one of the links to an API project, a backend project I worked on, and that was what I was interviewed with. Yeah, so you should have a working knowledge of one programming language. And no, it's not just for front-end developers, right? So it's for aspiring software engineers, right? Whether it be front end, whether it be back end, right? And now, like Bolaji said, they have 3 tracks now. So there's software engineering, there's SRE, and there's Web3, right? So you must not be a front end engineer to join the MLH Fellowship. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, thank you very much, Prosper. I think we'll skip question 2. You already answered what the experience was like at the MLH. We'll probably also skip number 3. I already mentioned earlier, for this year, the MLH Fellowship runs twice. There's the summer batch, which already has passed, and then there's the fall batch, which would start by September. Applications is currently open for that now. And then the second part of the third question was, can I apply even if I only learned through a boot camp?
Absolutely, you can. You can. Like I said, you just need a working knowledge. You need to understand one programming language at least to join the fellowship. Even if you're a self-taught engineer. I was a self-taught engineer when I joined. I didn't even go to a boot camp that is more organized, right? So you definitely can.
Okay, so that's it. There's no limitations here. As Prosper mentioned earlier, the crux of it is just that you have some experience. However, you got that knowledge, even if it meant you just, you just woke up and you found yourself understanding what variables were, even though you never learned them. That's fine. As much as you have quite some experience, you can apply for the MLH Fellowship. I think the fourth question is already answered. Is the fellowship open to beginners? I think the answer is no. You do need to have a couple of experience working at least and building some stuff, and then you can apply. So think about it like an internship. Beginners don't get to intern. You need to have learned, and at least you have quite a number of experience. Then you get to intern to like build up what you've learned. So you don't need to be an expert. You don't need to be proficient in many things, but you just need to have some knowledge, basically. So the fifth question says, what type of project should an applicant submit for the fellowship?
So for this question, I don't want to restrict you, right? I think what I'll tell you is submit your best project, right? Submit your best project. So take a look at all the projects you've previously worked on, whether it's front end, whether it's back end, whatever, even if it's an automation script, like for those that want to apply to SRE, right? As long as it's something you have talking points on, right? Because like I said, your technical interview will be based on that project, right? So any project you've worked on in the past that you can look back at and feel like, okay, someone can ask me lots of questions from this project, right? I think that's kind of project you should submit your best project. I think that's like the best answer I can give you. I can't tell you to work on front end project or work on back end project. No, like something you've worked on that is like that is on GitHub that I can share, right? And feel like someone can ask you questions on, right? So submit that project. For me, it was a backend API I worked on. I also had front end projects I've worked on, right? But I decided like I felt like that was like at the time that was like my most technical project because I did a whole lot of things that I've not done before, right? So that was why I submitted that project, and I felt like it will make me look good, it will make my application look better, right? And there was a lot of talking points in the interview. So your best project is what you should submit.
All right. Thank you very much, Prosper. The next question is, how will a backend developer benefit from this program? I think a bit of all you've been saying answers that.
You
We'll probably just yeah.
yeah,
You want
you
to say
benefit
something?
a lot. Yeah, I said you benefit a lot. Yeah, you benefit a
Okay.
lot. Yeah.
All right. So the seventh question says, what are the criteria for selection? And I
Uh,
mean, I think the best projects, you've already clarified that. Just pick your best project,
mhm.
whatever that is, whatever project you feel the most proud of, you feel is the most technical you've worked on. If you people will be able to ask you questions on, feel free to submit that. But then you could take like the criteria for selection and how can you increase your chances?
Yeah. Yeah. So I would also want to heavily refer people to please check out the frequently asked question, the fact session of the MLH Fellowship, because I know they revise criteria every time they are opening up the fellowship, right? So please keep your eye on the site and check out if there are any updated criteria. So as at the time of my application, like Bolaji said, you must be above 18, right? I think one other thing that it's not really a criteria, but I think it's something that helps you stand out if you eventually get called for an interview, right? You have to have a working internet, right? You really need to have a working internet, and at least try to, for your interview and even for your internship, try to get an environment that's sort of quiet. Well, I'm not sure in this day and age you can get an absolutely, well, it's possible you can build an absolutely quiet space for yourself. Because, I mean, my space is actually very quiet at the moment, right? So, but try as much as possible to have a conducive space where you can interview from, right? Because I know people that they didn't get through just because of bad internet, right? Because these people are interviewing probably thousands of, it's not just an African thing, it's the entire world, right? So they have probably millions of applications or thousands of applications that they need to go through, and you got invited, right? So you have to make sure that your internet is good. At least you can hear the interviewer and the interviewer can hear you. So good internet is very important, right? Like I said, at least one working knowledge of a programming language, right? Yeah, and then you send your application. I think that's pretty much what I can really answer to that, right? But please
Yeah.
refer to their FAQ session for that the particular track you want to apply to, because I remember, I think that site reliability engineering, I think at the time there was a time I was looking at it, and I think it wasn't, I'm not sure if it was even open to Africa at the time, but I would confirm, right? Because I think they were doing this thing where, for people joining their SRE team, the intention was then for them to also have some on-site experience, because you'll be working with Facebook engineers, right? So they wanted the SRE guys to have on-site experience with some of those um, Facebook engineers, right? So you just need to go on the page and confirm from MLH, right, what the criteria is, right? So it's something they change every time.
All right. Thank you very much, Prosper. The link to the FAQ is on your screen also. You can take a look at it while we are there. So yeah, so as Prosper mentioned, try as much as you can to get good internet. I know it's quite kind of a hassle for many of us in this part of the world. So even if it means you going to your parents' place, trying to find a hub, going to some family members' place, however you work it out, you can find some way to increase your chances. So don't say, "Oh, I don't have good internet in my house, I won't do this." No, find a way to move around, find the best place, go to a site, whatever it is, figure out how that would work. I think we skip the eighth question. It's pretty much similar to the previous one, the best practices and tips. I think you've shared a couple of that already. I'll just try and rehash many of those again. try as much as you can to like have good internet or at least stable internet for your interviews, and also for the internship program. Try to have proficiency in like at least one programming language. Make sure you put your best project forward. What that means is if you're still learning, probably you should sit this one out and like join the next one. If you think you've learned for quite some time, then you have like a huge chance here in that sense. Look for your best project, one that in one sense is like you could say a lot about it, the challenges you went through, the idea behind it and all that stuff. So I think that some of the tips that Prosper has mentioned so far. And so the next question would be, that's already answered. How much coding experience did you have? I think Prosper already mentioned that, of course, he was already building stuff at the time, but he wasn't an expert in one sense. So we've rehashed that many times already now. You do need to like have some level. Of course, can't measure that. It's going to be up to you to figure out what that would look like. And I guess the thing here also is if you're not sure, just apply. Right. So however you feel right now, even if you think, well, I'm a beginner, that's fine. Apply. There's no harm in applying when we really can't tell if you fit what they're looking for. You might think, well, I'm not an expert enough, and then you just might be as much as what they're looking for in that sense. An internship program, the goal is to help you learn how to work in the real world, right? So you've taken some courses, you've gone through a boot camp, you've learned. You can confidently say that I'm a front-end engineer or I'm an XYZ engineer, build some stuff, then you qualify for this. So the 11th question says, have you got any advice on the project to submit for the application? I think we've answered this already. Can you apply if you haven't yet participated in the hackathons? I think this question is coming off because there's a part in the I think in the where is it? Somewhere in the FAQs that mentioned that you must have attended one of the MLH events or hackathon for you to be eligible. I mean, it's in the FAQ, but it's not on the website. So I'm not so sure if like it's a hard requirement. But during your time, was that a thing?
No, it wasn't. Yeah, and that was why I said they always review criteria, right? So it wasn't part of the criteria to apply. Yeah. So
please,
I think they need to confirm. So go to the track you want to apply for and read through the criteria. But I think the hackathon. So well, at the time when I was very involved with communities and even GitHub campus experts, I know MLH had what they call local hosts, MLH local hosts. It's more like a network of smaller MLH communities scattered across around the world, right? So I think I only really organized. Was it me? I can't remember, but I know I've been involved with an MLH local host event, right? So I think that should pass for an MLH event, right? Yeah. So, and I've honestly not really heard of any. I might be wrong, but at the time I was still very, very deeply involved with communities. Right. I have not really heard of any huge MLH hackathon happening in Africa or any of these students. It was mostly in Europe. They were doing all of those hackathons. Yeah. So I don't think you should let that stop you from applying. Right. So just be sure and read through the requirements for the track you want to apply to and go ahead with the application.
Yeah, and just to add a bit to that, I think you might find it in the FAQs. It's also on the application form. It's mentioned there that you should have attended one of their events or hackathon. And I think, of course, it's also a way for them to try to bring you into their own community because the MLH is like, it goes beyond the fellowship. They do a lot of stuff. So, I mean, there's enough time. So if you can go to mlh.io/event, see what's happening, you can join a virtual activity. That also helps you to better understand the group you're joining and what exactly does the Major League hacking community looks like, right? And I think they also have this, what's it called? I think it's called Global Hack Week events. So the link is also on your screen, ghw.mlh.io. You can just check both links, find something that's happening soon, and just join, see how it feels like before you apply in that sense. So you can be able to tick that part of the application form that says you've attended one of the events. So I think we can move to the next question. And that question says, I think that's number 13. What are the technical skills required for a successful MLH fellowship? probably answered it, but maybe just want to just rehash again.
Yeah, so like I said, you need at least a working knowledge of at least one programming language. You need to at least, I'm not saying you need to have good communication skills, right? Your communication, it must not be perfect, right? You need to be able to say something someone can understand. I mean, because you are going to be talking to a diverse range of people from different walks of life, like backgrounds, right? So you need to have good communication skills. Yeah, and in good communication skill, one of the things I think you would also need is you need to know when to ask for help. I feel like that's one thing that might hold you back from having a successful fellowship, because you might be struggling with something and you don't open up. Nobody knows you're struggling with something, right? So, as part of the communication that I was talking about, you need to have you need to know when to ask for help. I think that's something that is going to help you a lot to have a very fantastic and successful fellowship. What else? Good internet. I mean, I'm from Nigeria. I'm in Nigeria, and I know how bad internet is. It's very frustrating, right? So, to the best of your ability, try to have good internet, because it's also going to. It's not just when I'm talking about good internet. It's not just for your interview. I mean, like I said, you have team meetings, you have stand-ups. Yeah, I forgot to mention initially. You have stand-ups where you talk about what you worked on the previous day. So it's something that requires good internet, right? Because again, MLH Fellowship is a remote first fellowship, right? It's you work from anywhere in the world, right? So you just need to make sure that your working conditions, it's favorable for you, right? And it can enable you do your best work, right? So you have good internet, communicate openly, right? And I think you'd have a successful MLH fellowship, and make friends, right? Make friends. You meet a whole lot of people there, so make friends. Don't be shy. That's the word. Don't be shy, right? Talk to people, make friends, make connections. Yeah.
All right. Thank you very much, Prosper. I think we'll skip the next question. We've already answered a bit of like how vigorous the MNH program is. We've mentioned it's not beginner friendly, but it doesn't mean you need to be an expert. You just need to have a couple of experience. I think Prosper already has mentioned some tips to scale through the application process. So we have some questions down there that are not so related to the MLH program. So I'll leave that last and take some questions from the chat so we can run through those first. So this question is from Onifade. It says, were you a student during the internship and how was it like combining school with the internship?
Yeah, absolutely. I was a student. So, well, I was lucky. When I say I was lucky, I did my MLH fellowship 2020. And if you go back memory lane, you remember that 2020 was Corona year. Yeah, so
Yeah.
I literally was not I literally was not schooling actively when I was doing the fellowship. But yeah, I can still answer that questions, because after MLH, remember I said I got my full time where I work at the moment, Demos Cloud. I got that job 2 months into MLH fellowship, right? So I was working full time as a software engineer, and I was also schooling, right? So the way I think the truth, when people ask me this sort of question, I feel like we know the answer, but we just want someone to tell you what to do, because it all comes down to priorities and time management, right? So as a person, you need to map out your priorities. These are my priorities. Like you make a list. This is something I feel like it's priority for me. It's very important to me. I just need to do this, right? When you make that list, right? We all have 24 hours, and the truth is 24 hours is very enough. Just spread your priority across the time you've been given by God, right? God has given everyone 24 hours, right? So what I did, right, or when I was working, what I do is, I mean, I was in final year, right? So I well, this is a subjective answer in terms of how to manage classes and work, right? I mean, at the time, I prioritized my final year project, very important, because if I don't do my project, I can't graduate. So it was priority for me. Project was very, very important for me. Then also prioritized my work, right? Because then it was bringing food to my table, right? And I disassociated myself from lesser unimportant activities, right? You see that especially for those schooling in Nigerian universities, right? Typically, when you go to school or you have lectures and lecturer is not coming, I don't sit around and waste time. I probably go to the library and tell someone if lecturer is around, call me, right? So I feel like to answer your question and not beat around the bush, make your priority, right? And do proper time management. Do proper time management, right? I think these two things is really going to help you. And to be honest, you also need a little bit of sacrifice, right? That's just the truth. You need a bit of sacrifice. What that sacrifice will be is solely on you. What my sacrifice was missing some classes, right? I missed lots of classes. Well, in retrospect, unimportant classes, classes I could easily stay in my house and read for, right? Because we had materials and all of that in school, right? So what the sacrifice you feel you need to make, I won't be the one to tell you miss class, right? You decide for yourself based on what you feel is priority at that point in your life. But making a list of your priority and good time management is like the two things I feel you need to combine internship with schooling. But I think it's very doable. I've done it. I did it, right? So you just need to. I mean, I think Bolaji also did it, working and schooling, right? So it all boils down to what your priorities are and you doing proper time management. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you very much, Prosper. And just as Prosper mentioned, it's not a financial advice. So uh, just to put that caveat out there. Okay, so we have another question from David. Says, what are the kind of projects that are strong enough or more likely to fetch you a place when applying to a front-end engineering track for MLH? Before you answer, just to clarify, there's no front-end engineering track. There's no front-end backend. It's software engineering. So when you get in, how the internship would work would be your interest. You could work on a project that is more front-end focused. It could be both. So it depends on how you apply, what you put out as your strong foot. So then
Yeah.
I can let you answer
Yeah.
that, Prosper.
I was gonna strong. I was gonna say that there is no the concept of front end, back end does not exist in MLH. To be honest, right? I'll shock you. You might join and you those open source projects you use, like I was mentioning, just if you're a front end engineer, if you're a back end engineer, you must have written some testing, right? And that framework you've used for your testing, just you get to work on it, right? Homebrew for my pod, some of us in my pod worked on Homebrew. Homebrew is Ruby. Homebrew was written in Ruby, right? So they are not. It's not focused on making. MLH is not focused on making you a front end engineer. MLH is not focused on making you a back end engineer, right? MLH is focused on helping you become grounded. Like it gives you more like a gentle introduction to how software engineering works in the real life, right? And the model, the way MLH is trying to achieve this is using open source, right? So you get to see what software engineering looks like, right? And please remove your mind from I'm only a backend engineer, I can only work on backend things. I'm only a front end engineer, I can only work on front end things when getting into MLH, right? Because you could literally get assigned to a project where you've not written the language before. Like I said, I was assigned to work on OMIZHS, right? And I was doing shell scripting, right? Prior to that time, I've only learned about bash scripting from the times I was delving into Linux development, but I've never come down to like write any bash script, right? So it was very new to me. I think it was towards the end of my fellowship that I got moved to a TypeScript project, and even at the time, TypeScript was new to me because I was mostly writing JavaScript. So I had to start writing JavaScript with the typed system, right? So I was like, what is string? Like you have to define this as a string. You have to define this as an as a number and all of those stuff, right? So TypeScript was still new to me, and like I said, so coming out of MLH Fellowship, I was introduced to bash scripting. I was introduced to TypeScript. I mean, TypeScript, I knew I had sleepless nights because I was going through this code base and I forgot it. I think Slate. The name of the project was Slate. It's this what you see is what you get editor, right? So it was written in TypeScript, so I had to contribute to it, right? So I was looking at this massive code base and I thought yeah, I know this thing should be JavaScript, but I was very confused, right? So I had to do a lot of digging, asking questions, and all of that, and that was how I was able to contribute to that project. So please remove your mind from I'm going to come in do front end projects, I'm going to do back end project. No, just go with the mindset that you are going in for, if you're applying for the software engineering track, you are going into be exposed more to the world of software engineering. And software engineering doesn't just end with coding, right? Software engineering involves real people, communication, like how do you work in a team setting, right? So these are the things you're looking out for. Then the technical part is now you working on the actual software engineering project, right, in the open source space, right? So just remove your mind from those software, from backend, front end, and all of those stuff.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Prosper. I think that's very helpful. We have another question from Rose. It says, can someone apply to a sector that they know nothing about, like the hackers? It's quite unclear. I don't know if you're referring to those on the cybersecurity part. There's no track for that. But I think probably you're referring to the part where I did mention hackers who want to dive deep into blockchain technology, which is pretty much just referring to those who like to build stuff like this. When you hear the word like in the archives, like someone who builds stuff and likes to hack out projects. So yeah, if you're referring to that, if you don't know anything about building to a degree, then you do need to know some things, as Prosper already mentioned. It's not for those who do not have any experience at all. And there is really no sectors here. And if your question is pretty much, do you apply to a track you know nothing about? Then of course the answer is no, because like we've said, you need to have some experience. So if you're applying to the Web3 track, I want to believe you need to have like quite some experience on that track. Same for the site reliability engineering track. So as Prosper mentioned earlier, make sure you take a look at the FAQs for each of the track to be sure you can look out for any information that they're asking. So I think we have another question also from Rose also. It says, does the project have to be code only? Because I have a project that I'm doing right now. I'm on the research phase, not yet started coding. Is that something I can submit?
You actually need to submit a code sample. You need to submit, because if you go to the FAQ page and you go through the application admissions, I think the first question is, how does MLH review my code sample, right? So you need to submit a code sample, right? Because that's something the reviewer will need to go through. I mean, your code sample is concrete. It's a concrete evidence that you've actually you actually have some experience working on real life projects or working on any project at all. It must not be something that solves a real life problem, right? It could be something as simple as a calculator. It could be something as simple as a to-do list. It could be something as simple as an e-commerce page, whatever. At least something. It needs to be a code project, something like you've written code for, right? So I believe that is the kind of project you need to. If you have if you're working on a project that's still in a research phase, right? I think you should keep working on that, but I don't think you should apply with that. Well, it depends on if so. Rose, I don't know if you're applying for the software engineering track or the Web3 track or this SRO track, right? Depending on track you're applying for, you just need to submit a code base, because that's what I'm now speaking strictly for the software engineering track, right? You need a code base, because all the questions, like I said in the beginning, you have a technical interview, right? Because the first interview during my time, I had 2 interviews. The first interview was just an introductory interview. I think they wanted to gauge how good my internet was and my communication skills, right? If I could speak English, because the internship was, you have to speak English to be part of the internship, right? So those 2 things, like you just need to have a code base that you can submit, because the reviewer will go through your code base and ask you question from that code sample you submitted, right? I remember my interviewer asking me to explain HTTP, right? Because he was seeing I submitted an API, right, that was making some HTTP requests, right? So he asked me a question around HTTP, right? So as an interviewer, I don't really have much insight to the research you're actually doing. And quite all right, it might be a project. As an interviewer, it might even be a project the interviewer has no domain experience or expertise in, right? So that's why you just need to submit something concrete so that you get assigned an interviewer that has domain experience with that language or with that field. So that person is like the best person that can actually interview you eventually. So to answer your question concretely, you need to have a code sample, something you can submit, because that's what your technical interview will be based on.
Yeah, thank you. I hope that's helpful for you. And just to add, as we move further, as Prosper mentioned earlier, joining the community is very essential with stuff like this. He found out about the MLH Fellowship in the GitHub student community he was a part of. I'm sure many of you are just hearing about this for the first time also from Open Source Community Africa. And this is what we do at Open Source Community Africa. We are a community of open source contributors, maintainers, and enthusiasts across Africa. We have like 30 plus chapters in different cities distributed across most part of the continent in that sense. So we have a Discord server which you should join. And if you do have further questions after this webinar, you can ask there. If you need help, for example, Prosper has mentioned stuff like you get to prepare for an interview, which is a thing on its own. You need to treat this like a job, which would mean you have to rehearse, you have to like look for interview questions. And Prosper is on that Discord. So you could also, ask, oh, this is my project. What kind of questions do you think would be asked? And then you can get pointed to like different resources on how to prepare. And that's like what we do, trying to help everyone upskill and connecting to different opportunities like this one and several opportunities that we share just exclusively to our community members. So if you've not joined yet, you can go to oscarafrica.org/discord, and yeah, we'll be glad to have you join us. So another question from Lucky, I think we've answered this a bit, well, really not a bit, yeah. So any project, it could be a beginner project, like whatever it is, in as much as it's a project, it's something you're proud of, your best project. I think I was going to add to what Prosper was saying earlier when he said, you need to submit a code base. You don't, whatever it is, if it's in as much as at that point that's your best project, go for it. No matter how you feel about it, yeah, go for it. The next question from David says, does the time zone difference really affect you? What are the times really in conversion to Nigeria time that you mostly have meetings?
Yeah, that's a good question. So, like I said, when you interview and you eventually get into the fellowship, you'll be added to what we call pods, right? Pod is like it's like small teams of fellows, MLH fellows, currently interning, right? So, as a pod, you will get like every pod gets assigned, I think, 2 or 3 open source projects to work on. Right. So as a pod, your pod would be responsible for working on three or 2 open source projects. So depending on the project you get assigned to or you decide to work on, you and your pod members can decide what time works best for everyone. Right. So this was a long time ago. I can't really remember the exact time, but I believe our stand up when I was interning, our stand up in Nigerian time used to be 10 a.m. Right?
It's the same thing now. It's on the website now. Daily stand up is 10 a.m.
Yes. So at the time it used to be 10 a.m. Nigerian time for me. Right. So it's something you got. I don't know if they fixed it, if it's fixed now, but then I remember we decided what time worked for everyone. Right. Even for our retrospectives. Right. I think our retrospectives I think it was in the evening, and it was once every Friday, right? So the Friday is like the end of every week, right? So we always had that retrospective once every Friday, and we decided the time. So the time that was chosen, I think it was around 4:30 Nigerian time, right? So you don't really need to worry about that time zone a lot, right? It's something that I'm sure they will do such that it favors everyone. You get. So yeah, time
Yeah.
zone will not really be a big issue.
Yeah, and then just to add to that from the FAQs, because it's a similar question there in terms of time commitment, and this is what it said. In order for you to be able to collaborate with your pod, every pod we have a set of program hours based on the time zones of the members. You should assume that you need to be online Monday through Friday from around 10 a.m. until 6 p.m. in your local time. You're welcome to contribute additional hours to the program, however, it's not a requirement. Like Prosper said, it's pretty much in your local time. That's why they have pods to group you together, so you don't have to be communicating with someone who's like in a very distant time zone from you.
Yeah.
Okay, so another question from Rose. Then we take our last few questions here. Between a group and personal project, which are most likely to be considered here?
Yes, group project, personal project, right? Like I said, even if it's a group project, you just need to submit a project. If someone asks you a question, you can defend and answer, right? So if it's a group project, fine. Nobody cares if it's a group project. Can you answer? If I um as an interviewer, if I go through that project that you've submitted and I begin to ask you a question, I don't expect you to give questions like I was not the one that worked on this. I was not the one that worked on this because I mean I'm asking you questions based on what you worked on, right? So even if it's a group project, right, try as much as possible to understand what went into that project, right? You understand the project in and out so that when you get asked questions, you can give a good answer. Because mind you, it's an interview, right? That you got the interview does not mean you've gotten into the fellowship, right? It's just that your application was good enough and you met the criteria, right? Now, this is the selection phase for them to decide who should actually get into the fellowship, right? So, right, even if it's a good project, a group project, right, Rose, just submit. I think the answer should be submit a project that you can defend. Submit a project you can defend. That's my best answer for you, and I hope that helps.
Yeah, I believe that helps. Thank you very much, Prosper. So we'll take a few of the questions we have already on the screen. If you do have some extra questions, feel free to ask. We might be able to take a couple of them before we end. So the next question we had here said, how easy is it to break into the tech industry from a non-tech background? What are the methods you use to gain internship placements?
Yeah. So I would love to make a disclaimer that this answer is super subjective, right? Because I remember when I was getting started, I met a friend or a community member at the time that told me that he has been learning how to code for 2 years. I think he was saying he has been learning how to learn. He has been trying to learn JavaScript for 2 years and he has not yet mastered JavaScript. So for someone like that, he might say that it's hard, right? So I think experience is subjective because what shapes our experience are like things that contribute to our experience are like things like how accessible is how accessible is mentorship to you. For me, when I was starting out, I was fortunate enough to like have a mentor from the onset, right? Things like communities also shaped my experience because on communities you can easily find mentors or even or something close to a mentor because in communities you can ask questions and different people will answer you, give you different perspectives, right? So if you 5 years ago I would have said getting into coding or getting into the tech industry was hard, or 7 years ago, but now it's super easy thanks to communities like OSCA Africa, right? Open source community Africa, because when you join communities, like it's almost like you'll be standing on the giants or you'll be standing on the shoulders of giants because these people they've done the thing you want to do, right? All you just need to do is you just have to be active in that communities, and one of the ways you can be active in the community is by asking questions, by being involved in community activities. All right. So for me, I feel at this time, 2024, it's very easy to break into tech. Now, if you are looking towards learning a concrete language, or you are looking towards learning a particular track, I don't want to say stack. If you are pursuing a track, like you are pursuing the web development track, or you are pursuing the cloud engineering track, or you are pursuing the machine learning track, right? We have a ton of resources online. I mean, we have non-profit like Free Code Camp releasing tons of free tutorials and videos with which you could actually learn. We have other companies like in Africa, we have Alternative School Africa that to some extent subsidized learning, right? So when I started, we didn't have those things. I mean, you just needed, I mean, and I think we have more curated content because when I was starting out, there were curated content, but you had to pay for them, right? Because those any created content you find then is like in courses, like on I think then again I have to give a big shout out to Andela, right? They don't do it anymore, but Andela Learning Community, right, was a huge platform from that helped me structure my learning, right? Because then the underlying ALs in the underlying lab community, I got access to the Udacity platform. I was taking well curated courses on Udacity for free, thanks to Andela and their partnership with Google, right? And I think pro aside too, right? So I think the barriers to entry into tech now is very easy. And I think if you ask me now, getting started, how should I get started? Look for a tech community to join, right? And I mean, you are in an event organized by a tech community, Open Source Community Africa, right? So I think join Open Source Community Africa, right? That's the first step, right? Be involved with the community activities. And because what involvement does for you is that it opens you up to it opens you up to knowledge, right? Because when you are involved, right, with things like attending community events, right, you get exposed to knowledge. Actively asking questions or engaging in the community, people get to answer your questions, right? So I think it's super easy to break into the tech community and tech industry now. So for me, one of the ways I think I've answered the question, how do you get internship placement? Through communities. I mean, I learned about the MLH Fellowship through a community I was involved with, right? So join communities, right? And I think also, I feel like joining a community is going to do you a whole lot of good. So identify a community and join, right? It's going to help you go very far in your tech journey. And there's this thing people do. I mean, I was involved with communities, like I was a facilitator and the community lead. There's this thing people do. Then I used to notice people join communities and they just stay dumb and they don't. I feel like they are shy or they don't want to be known. It's not good. Like when you join a community, I am not saying be a noisemaker. You don't have to be a noisemaker, right? But just try as much as possible to engage with that community, because if you don't engage something, you can't get anything from it. Some people be like, I belong to this community and I'm not learning anything. But the truth is, check your engagement rate. Are you really engaging, right? So try as much as possible to engage, not just join and engage in the community, and it's really going to help you go far in your tech journey.
Thank you very much, Prosper. That's definitely very helpful. I think the next question would not answer that here. It's a question around machine learning. How and where can you start to contribute? As Prosper already mentioned, join our community. We have machine learning experts who could also point you in the right direction. But on the surface level, there are projects on GitHub, on Hugging Face, and a couple of other machine learning related sources where you can find projects to contribute to. We also have like listings in the community where we can point you to different projects. So I think you should definitely join that. And the next question is, where do you get open source internship opportunities in Nigeria and abroad? That has already been mentioned by Prosper. Join the communities. We do have connections to different other communities, and that's what we do at OSCA, also connecting to opportunities. And it's not even just an organization thing. It means you're in the community with like 4,000 persons. If I see something that I do not have a need for, I would share it. And those who need it to like apply for it. And that's pretty much how it works. You got to meet people, you got to let them know that you are looking for this. I have this experience. If you see something, let me know. And we do let each other know where we see this stuff. So feel free to join the OSCA Discord. The link has been on the screen a couple of times. The last question for today is, maybe we might have one more from the chat, is what values does open source contribution add to a developer's career, and what level of expertise or fluency in programming does it require?
Yeah, so I think one word, exposure, right? And I think as a developer, you're the degree of exposure you have will contribute to how far you go in your career, right? Because it's almost like the more exposure you get, the more you know what's possible and attainable, right? So open source contribution gives you exposure, right? And imagine being involved in an open source project, and in your day job or your 9 to 5 job where you work at, there's a problem and it has something to do with that open source project you are involved in, and you're the only one in the company that can solve that problem, right? This is just one scenario I'm just trying to paint, but I think the concrete answer or the direct answer to your question is open source gives you exposure, right? And exposure is very, very valuable in any knowledge industry, because software engineering is a knowledge industry, right? So the more exposure you are, the more exposure you have, the more you what, right? The more you what, right? So it gives you exposure. And to answer your question of the level of expertise or fluency, right? So there's this beginner mistake people make. To be honest and to tell the candid truth, open source is not necessarily for beginners, right? Though I have to give kudos to a lot of open source projects that are making the project beginner friendly, right? There are a whole lot of projects that have made their projects beginner friendly. In this sense, when I say beginner friendly, I mean the barrier to entry has been lowered, right? Such that you you don't struggle when starting out, because one of the things that push people away from open source is the struggling phase, right? When you want to get started, you tend to always struggle, like, I'm not understanding this, I'm not that, right? It's one of the biggest barriers to entry to open source. I mean, I had my own fair share of that, right? So but then one tip I'll give you is to always go towards open source projects where like you have experience with the stack that they've used, right? So for me, I mean, one time I contributed to the Node.js project. I think that at the time they were trying to build this Node.js.dev. If you type Node.js.dev, it's like an adjacent, well, it's like an adjacent project from nodejs.org, right? And nodejs.dev is focused on education, right? So my contribution was as simple as adding some UI design for the page, and writing the code for that UI design, right? So I was able to do that because I was already proficient with the language JavaScript and TypeScript, and the framework they were using was Gatsby at the time. I don't know if they've changed it because I've not contributed to that project in a long time. They were using Gatsby, right? So it was very easy because I was already fluent with JavaScript. So open source is not 100%. Now, when I say beginners, I'm not talking about people that have started with no experience. Beginners, if you don't know how to code, you cannot contribute to open source. If it's a coding project, if it's a project that has something to do with coding, right? So there are other ways you can contribute to open source. Join the communities. If you are someone that is good with people, if you're a people person, you can help organize events for that project. You can help raise awareness for that project. You can help host events for that project. So open source contribution is not necessarily tied to coding, right? It's not necessarily tied to. There are other aspects of open source contribution that reduces the barrier to entry, because I feel like one way you can easily get your feet so deep into any open source code base is getting context. If you don't have context into like what the project solves, you can't even contribute to it, because you can't have any meaningful contribution, because meaningful contributions are like you adding to the project, making the project better. And you cannot make anything better if you don't understand or have proper context into what the project solves. I'll give you an instance. There was a time I was trying to contribute to Kubernetes. I mean, I was just starting out with Kubernetes. I've not really even understood what Kubernetes was, and I was already having this form of I want to contribute to the Kubernetes project. It's not going to be possible because I mean, I had a language barrier. Kubernetes is written in Golang. I've not learned Golang, right? And I want to start contributing to Kubernetes. That endeavor didn't really pan out well because I had a lot of fundamentals that I've not yet sorted, right? Fundamentals like understanding the language, Golang, fundamentals like understanding how Kubernetes works, right? On a basic level, right? So you have to have a proper understanding of fundamentals before you can really delve into contributing to open source project. So in summary, to open source gives you exposure, and how you get started is you need to look towards open source projects you have proficiency in their stack. And I think that is going to really make your open source contribution experience a whole lot better and enjoyable.
All right. That's been a lot, Prosper. Thank you so much. I think we'll stop taking questions now. I think we've done quite a lot of answering, and I'm sure everyone has a lot of context now and a lot of information on how to apply to the MLH Fellowship itself, and also likewise how to get started in open source. I think one thing I'd just like to also add to what Prosper just said around what value does it add to you is beyond just your career, also you get to contribute to something that solves a problem. Sometimes we have this consumer mindset, at least at this most part of this world, and that's what we also try to change in open source community Africa, where we all get to be a part of this stuff. We're trying to get people from just being the billion users, as you probably hear when you talk about technical related stuff, to being the next billion creators, right? So you want to be a part of people who create stuff, and it starts from contributing or maintaining this project. This project solves problems, right? So you want to be a part of solving something that solves some social good in that sense in different capacities. So as you're improving your career, you're also getting to solve something, do something that matters in the world at large. I mean, that's your tool. If you're a software engineer, then code is what you have, right? Those who solve problems in physics, that's what they have. They can do all that stuff and create different cool stuff and hardware stuff. It's what you have, and then you get to use it. So thank you once again, Prosper. Super glad you could join us. And as we mentioned, Prosper will also be on the Discord. If you do have extra questions, feel free to put them there. I think I'll just let you say like one last word. You said so many words in that sense. So if you were going to speak to someone who's trying to like get started in open source, create your first project, or probably even start learning, what's that one word you would tell them?
Consistency. Yeah, so you need consistency to go find anything at all, open source, software engineering, whatever it is that interests you, right? You need to be consistent, right? You really, really need to be consistent, and I think it's gonna help you. Yeah.
All right. Thank you very much, Prosper. You heard it right from him. Consistency is the key here. And thank you so much once again, Prosper, for joining us. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining. You can find all the links to everything we've spoken about today on Discord. You could also go to our link tree to find all the links. MLH is at fellowship.mlh.io. Please ensure you apply as soon as possible. It starts soon. Deadlines for application, just give me a minute to read that out to you. It closes by 31st August 2024 for those in this part of the world. And for APAC, it's 15th July. That's closed already. So you have between now and the end of the month. So look at the criteria. If there's something you don't qualify for yet, try and check that off so you can apply immediately. Till next time, thanks for joining us once again, and do enjoy the rest of your day, morning, and evening. Bye, everyone.
Yeah, cheers, everyone.